we've got three kind of main topics, just AI in the general practice of law, AI particularly in intellectual property, and also AI as we see it in the future. So here I've got three things not to do in your general practice, and three things that you can do, four things you should be doing or trying to do. So the first one is know the tool and know what it can do and know what its pitfalls are. We had a case in the Southern District of New York where a lawyer used ChatGPT for his research. According to him, he did not know that it was not a true research tool. He thought it was Google. It's not. And so he cited fake cases in his motion. There were some other ethical issues. They basically, the judge issued an order to show cause. They were out of town, and they got reamed out by the judge, and they had to write letters to various people explaining what they'd done wrong. So this example of if he'd known, or if he'd done a little more research, would not have cited these fake cases. There's a case that I discovered after we went to print on this slide. The rapper Pearce from the Fugees was accused of illegal campaign contributions to Obama and lobbying
Trump not to get prosecuted for the illegal, which is hilarious. Like you
or
donated
some
to
sort
the
of
wrong guy if you didn't get prosecuted. Anyway.
And his lawyer used a AI to write the closing arguments. And now the lawyer is being sued, and they're asking for a retrial because the closing arguments were garbage. They conflated two different legal issues. They attributed songs to him that he never wrote, that other people wrote.
And it was a tool made by the guy, the attorney, and he was bragging about it on social media how he used this sweet tool to you're like, smooth, bro.
So yeah, he's a partial investor in this company, and the other investor was his co-counsel, even though the other investor doesn't have litigation experience, is not a practicing attorney. They bragged on the company, PR materials about how they used it. It took minutes to write the closing brief instead of hours. Eye level, yeah, exactly.
So you should totally use this tool. This is a pitch for the...
Yeah. Judge in Texas has issued a new local rule that requires lawyers to identify any AI-generated content in the briefs. So this is you've got your signature for your typical signature at the end, your signature that you're under the word count, and now also you haven't used any AI. In Colombia, we had a judge that used ChatGPT to decide a case. It's about a 5-page opinion, and he goes through the facts and then pastes verbatim his discussion with ChatGPT about the case and what is the state of the law in Colombia. And after that discussion, you have another couple paragraphs where he says, yeah, that's right, here's my rule. And so there's no, at least in the opinion there's no indication that he did any fact checking, that he did any other research. Of course, later he said, oh no, I did all that stuff, don't worry about it. But there's no there's no indication he did.
Bastion of Justice, Colombia.
Yeah. So now that you know sort of the limitations, right, that you have the hallucinations, you've got those other issues, what can you do? The marketing, blog writing, press releases, boilerplate. A quote I like is, I've already got the chisel and ChatGPT gives me, or AI gives me the marble. So if you're struggling for that first draft, there you go.
Bios. You can write bios really well with it too.
Bios, yeah.
That's great bios.
So we took our actual bios from the website and asked ChatGPT to make them more exciting. That's what we got.
There you go.
Yeah, it was very bombastic, at least mine was very warlike.
I think it's pulling from different practice areas. IP tends to be pretty chill, so it's pulling other lawyers.
There are already tools out that help with your e-discovery. I'm not going to name names because we're not doing that, and also that work on your own work product. And not to get too far ahead, but That's something that we think will be more helpful in the future. It's good for summarizing large documents. Again, just use it at the very beginning. I wouldn't rely on it for any detailed summary. There is some IP-specific artificial intelligence out there these days that can be used. Jonathan, do you?
Take a pause for a second. So, those of you who may not be familiar with IP practice, I think it may be kind of, Chris and I were talking briefly before this, uniquely suited to this kind of thing, right? We create intellectual property. It is all on paper, basically. I write patents for a living, mostly. We do some litigation too. Or 35-page documents that are just text, and then my client gets a stamp from the government that says this is cool, right? And so that's all. ChatGPT is a perfect tool for creating text in some sense, anyway. It has not been trained very well, as Chris was alluding to. And trademarks are almost kind of the same, right? You sort of have, you need the trademark to describe a certain goods and services in a text blob that conforms to a practice that is, there's a website you can look at to find appropriate text blobs. You just have to match your client's products to the thing that's on the thing. And so weirdly, I feel like IP practice may be really uniquely suited to this as the first sort of test ground. Also, we're all nerds and like can put together this stuff, and hopefully there's a million tools sort of coming out. And so, in some sense, the commentary that Massimo had earlier is like, we are not, and it's statutory too, like trademark and patent are both statutory, so we are not floating in the ether of sort of empathy and sort of thing. Like, it doesn't matter quite so much in our practice. It's more like, what's the invention? What does it do? Here's the steps you get there. And there's a lot of it, unfortunately, that is not that creative, I would say. That's sort of like, you've got to get this giant document prepared that describes what your client does well, and then push it through prosecution. So in that context, I think it's very likely there's going to be a bunch of services, there are already several that do, start the draft of the patent for you or try to draft the patent for you. There's some funniness in that. I think we talked about this.
And particularly we talked about, in your art unit, so say you've got a new invention in laundry detergent. Lots of people have already written about the state of the art in laundry detergent. So that's,
There's a huge online database of that art unit's patents. You can look up, it's publicly available to everybody, and then you could train exactly on the data set and then have AI say, this is what we're doing, this weird little thing, and it would be like, blah, 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 here's your whole patent. I mean, theoretically, it's a great fixed data set to do that with. Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
So better garbage in?
Yeah, or like at least a smaller world of garbage. You get a whole bunch of crappy patents, right? Like there's some measures. We use a tool right now called Patent Bots that will rate how good the patent is, like how well written it is in some sort of weird, vaguely AI sense. And so you could have it automatically select better ones, whatever that measure is, and use those as your small data set within laundry detergent or whatever. And we do a lot of sort of looking at databases. Like literally, I task Chris or he tasks me with searching through and looking for, is this trademark going to be a problem? Like, or this trademark going to be registrable? And those kind of tasks, there really is kind of a process to them that you could pretty well automate. And the only bit that would need, and there already are search services that do that, just sort of more Google-like search services. But if you had one more layer of intelligence, like, this is completely relevant, this is completely relevant, this is pretty relevant, like just would flag things, almost like you're talking about in criminal law, where you're running through this large questionnaire, and at least gives you an output that you can look at and say, and then some human makes that decision. That would be helpful too. We also thought, at least I think, that you'll start sort of IP licenses, especially maybe in music. We don't really do a lot of music work, or like film and television, where there is a lot of standardization already. You could sort of put in your basic terms, and rather than having a form you refer to, which most lawyers refer to a form for pleadings or for starting your patent application or whatever you're doing, it could be like, those are the general terms, blah, 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 and it will sort of pop out a pretty complete license or something like that. I forgot what this last one is.
This one was related to an article we found on WIPO about that. So trademark law is based on consumer confusion, and the idea here is that AI will be the consumer that could be confused. And the example is Amazon. You search for brand products, whatever, and you get all the knockoffs first. And so that's maybe almost more of a branding corporate issue. But for us, how are we going to try cases when AI is the person being confused, is the consumer that's showing those knockoff products.
Mhm.
Obviously, infringement and IP is very hot in AI generally right now. There's ownership issues. What if AI makes the invention? Been a couple, at least one case about that in the U.S. Many around the world. Generally, no patents allowed. Has to be human inventor. Same with copyright. And then we've got, on the infringement side, we've got people, Adobe and Microsoft, offering to indemnify their commercial users. They're so confident about that they're not going to infringe. You had a theory about this.
I have a theory about it. So one of my clients had me do some research on this. Basically, I don't know how much you guys are familiar with GitHub, maybe you're not, but like basically you're a programmer, and for the last 15 or 20 years, GitHub has been the place where you can sort of go and find code that might be relevant to your project and not have to rewrite it. And people post their own code up there, and some of it's private. It's a nice place where your team can look at the code together, and maybe nobody else can, but you can also post it publicly, and then people can pull down libraries, there's open source projects up there, there's lots of stuff. And so programmers are like, oh, I need a thing that does this, whatever. They find a driver for a weird chip, or that's on this, that's available on GitHub. GitHub was purchased like 3 years ago by Microsoft, and now it's internal to Microsoft development systems. And they've started using AI to help write code, and it has this giant set of code available. There's so many issues in there, which is like, and then the AI now uses that data set to feed, I want a code that does blah, 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 that, runs a clock on a user interface or whatever it is. And it goes, cool, I can do that. Let me find this piece and this piece and this piece, because I'm trained on this data set, here's your piece of code. And so Microsoft has, there's 2 layers now to GitHub. There's free, which everybody uses, and then there's a corporate version for like one of my clients who's paying for this corporate version. And they added a clause in there because people were worried about it. You're pulling chunks of code from other people, potentially, maybe even verbatim, probably not, but maybe even verbatim. There's a risk of infringement there, right? Like copyright infringement presumably is on some scale. Like if you take a tiny piece of Gone with the Wind, one little scene, maybe you're not infringing a copyright, maybe you are. Like it's really kind of subjective analysis that would be happening in the law. But if you take a tiny piece of code, are you infringing or not? Or if you take a whole bunch of tiny pieces of code from 15 different people, are they all infringing or not? It's this weird subjective question, and it's kind of what AI does, right? I've learned the world, and now this is what my new thing is. Is that new thing a derivative work that's subject to infringement or not? I don't know. And so Microsoft's response was, if you pay this fee, $20 a user or whatever it is for GitHub Pro, we will indemnify you. And then they have some caveats, like you have to use the code verbatim. That's never going to happen in development, ever. They're going to look at it and go, oh, this is kind of right, so that's never going to happen. And you have to turn off hallucinations, which is like an option. So like it's basically literally pulling exact code from somebody else. But they can flip this 2 ways, right? So now in their user agreement, if you're uploading code, they can say, you agree to let us use it for AI, you agree to let us copy it and riff it and do stuff. So on the back end, at least going forward, they can deal with that problem. Going back, they may not be able to deal with that problem. And obviously Microsoft's a huge wealthy company, they make a lot of money on this. It would just look really bad if they didn't do that, right? One of their big, these companies paying for this are large companies. My client is a very large company. And if they get sued for infringement for some code, and then Microsoft kind of has to step in, or no one's going to use this tool, right? Like, and they want them to use GitHub. And then there's one other thought I had on it, which was, and then but more basically, like, how is anyone going to know? This code is not probably going to be public. So how is infringement going to be determinable, even if it is happening? So it's like there's all these layers. So it's like a good PR move for Microsoft to be like, we got you. And in reality, I think it will never happen. But it's like they're trying to make people feel comfortable with using these AI tools, and they're taking reasonable steps to get there.
Mm-hmm. And that's similar to what Adobe is doing. I believe they're what do they call it, a magic eye, or they have some sort of AI fill in the background, but it's all trained on images that Adobe owns, so there's no risk that it's going to render to people. This kind of relates to what you said about the Microsoft user agreement, that if you use GitHub, you're adding your code to the database, so that as time goes on, it's less likely you're going to pull from something Microsoft doesn't already own. That leads in pretty well to the training data sets. The Reddit API changes.
I can do that if you want.
Yeah, go.
So I mean, the nerds of you are probably aware of this, right? Like Reddit is a giant data set. And I was a big user of Apollo. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Apollo. I love Apollo. But it's basically this, it was a free, or not free, actually I paid for it. It was like $5 for me because I wanted to support the guy. Free iPhone and an iPad Reddit viewer. And conveniently it stripped out ads. But that really wasn't the point. It was just a much better experience. Just really well put together app. The guy worked on it all the time. It was super great. Reddit's own app they bought was terrible. Or at least I viewed it as terrible. I'm getting used to it, but it's terrible. But so, and Reddit realized that ChatGPT was one of the biggest ones, but many of these sort of AIs have been trained for general communications on Reddit's data because there's a million posts from a zillion people on a zillion topics, and it was all public.
In real language.
Real language by some random dude or lady, you know, like, or whatever, who had a thought about washing machines or solar arrays or Transformers movies, like all the things, like everything. And so it was a great data set. And ChatGPT went in wholesale and was like, cool, thanks Reddit in 2021 and took it all. So Reddit was like, that's not good. We would like that data. And so they put in this change to make their API calls cost money. And they really put it in for AI purposes, but they couldn't figure out a way to do it. They probably could. AI versus apps, like Apollo was using those same API calls to pull the data down. And so they realized that they have a great data set. And your clients, if you have clients at some point, or your whatever, should think about that, the data sets you have, your patents in our case, or whatever that you've written. And that was, Reddit was like, made life difficult for average user to make money on the other back of data.
Yeah, so AI in the future IP, we've kind of hit on a lot of this, that we think the search tools are going to be better. The training sets, if we get the actual training sets on the patent office database, could really help.
I've been crazy things like you could pull all the file histories, you could do first drafts of responses from file histories, like as the trade, like it's crazy what you can do with patents.
So you can go, you mentioned by judge, you go by patent examiner.
An examiner. They already do that, by the way. There are already tools, not really ad driven, that tell you which examiner, like one of my examiners was like 99% rejection rate on patent, and I was like, I don't tell you, client, like we're not doing this patent. He's let it won in like 5 years. Yeah, I'm just thinking it's whatever. There's some very cool tools that came about that I sort of had the idea for a long time ago and never really did, or was busy trying to be a young lawyer. But I feel like there's a new wave of that's about to happen with tons of great data sets. It's just a really great data set.
And then just in the office, intake billing, a lot of people are already using custom chatbots for their intake to decide if even a real person wants to speak and to get that initial information. And yeah, I think it's kind of almost privacy law, but the agreements you make with respect to your data sets used to be just privacy related. We have these customers, they live in these places, they buy these products, and now that AI can be trained on that, that's a whole other aspect that I think isn't really developed yet and it is very developing. That we will be considering in the near future, when we're drafting agreements and licenses and cooperative agreements. And as you're saving time with your sort of more menial tasks, your first drafts, hopefully you will have more time for these creative outside the box concepts.
Or just a windsurf, whatever.
Yeah, a lot of coffee. I think that's it. Do you have anything? Yeah.
Thank you.